One thing I'd like to start with really is just underlining how little we know effectively. So with Miriam mentioned how we have a Marna and how that has dominated a lot of the discussion, but it's also remembering how little we have, even at a site like the Mara West, where we've managed to excavate around 20 houses over the last 10 years, so quite a good data set for modern archaeological excavation. We don't have any upper stories. We also don't have any basketry, any leatherwork, any wooden material that would have changed significantly what these houses were like. So I think it's worth underlining how little we know in all these cases, really. And I wonder if typologies are something we do need to understand this question of sameness to inform individuality and variation from sameness. But I wonder if we need to move away from typologies and start thinking about patterns of use of space, but also aspirations and what persists when other factors come into play. And I think it's important that as we think about typologies and house plans, we also move away from those very kind of clean black on white plans that we're used to seeing, and ideally move to something a bit more nuanced, and that's where 3D modeling will hopefully help. We've all, I think, over the years become aware of some problematic terms that are used in describing Egyptian and Nile Valley houses. So thinking of terms like reception room and bedroom and so on. I think it's very easy for those terms to lead us to imagine things from our own world. And so what we've been working on as a Mara West, and this particularly with Matt Dalton, who recently completed a PhD on the micromorphology of these houses, is looking at much more neutral terms, such as front room and inner room and so on. And that has led us to think about the patterning that is taking place in these houses. So I think one of the things we need to move towards is thinking of these less as kind of a typical architectural layout, as Miriam talked about, but rather what are the range of relations, encounters, the social interactions, the decision making, the experiences, the tasks that happen in a house. It's a place of agency, both from on the basis of individuals, but also households, and a place of agency being applied, so exploitation, whether that's by the state or other. One of the things I'm really wary of is using the architectural layout to kind of define how we think about these spaces. So if we can just come into the present day, think of these terraces of Victorian houses in British streets. They all look the same in the plan, but you go into those spaces and they're used in incredibly different ways. Obviously, you have people from all over the world using these spaces in different ways. And I think we're beginning to get a sense of that at Amara West, because we do have this patterning in certain types of spaces that reappear, but it doesn't mean they're being used in the same way. To give you an example of that, both Manuela Lehmann's work on the finds and Matt Dalton's work on the micromorphology columns from one of the houses, D11.1, seems to suggest there's woodworking going on there. There's a real concentration of evidence for that kind of material. In other houses, we're not getting that. So it just makes us think, hold on, the spaces might look relatively similar from the outside, the front door on the street and so on, but there may well have been very different activities going on, sounds, smells, rubbish, all of that. And I think we need to think of that. And that's the danger of being led by plans the whole time.
I think to consider the space syntax, how those different rooms are related with each other, definitely helps to recognize whether there are the ones that are only accessible maybe from one particular room, so the more private ones basically at the end of a sequence, whereas you will always find one in the center that gives way to a number of different rooms, some kind of a central hall actually. So in that sense, I think it's very useful to visualize how the different rooms are related with each other and learn a little bit more about their function, although it's so difficult to ascribe a function.
On that last point, of course, plans are absolutely essential, and other types of record keeping around these structures and buildings. But I would hope that we could increasingly orientate our writing and our interpretation to a user point of view, i.e. the inhabitant. And we probably don't know their name, and we probably don't know how many there were, etc., etc. But just thinking, and that's why I've always found that Busy Lives volume by Anna and Barry so inspiring, because even in how it organizes the types of objects, it's about how they were used rather than kind of essentially museum taxonomies of objects. And I think maybe there's some work to do there in terms of houses. I mean, there's an increase in kind of experiential and sensorial archaeological approaches, both in Egypt and beyond. But yeah, maybe in our writing, we need to think about that a little bit more.
Obviously, you're very right. The first thing you have is the plan, basically, to look at, and it's also very different when you are dealing with maybe material from older excavations. It's not really possible to go there to participate in the excavation. I think it's very useful what Neal does with this video, with the experience like today, with obviously comparing what you see in the local village, all of this, what you guys also did for your thesis. So I think that's probably the way to go, working with reconstructions, with getting away from those plans, basically. But there is obviously that's the first focus.
I wanted to add two issues, and these that were mentioned by Neal and Miriam. One is the contextual analysis that might provide better understanding of the usage of the rooms, regardless of the plan. And the second, I wish there were more data from microarchaeological analysis of the different rooms and the activities that might have took place there, either for organic remains, the organic residues that might have preserved in the containers, that might give us more indications of what activities took place in these structures.
Yeah, I mean, that second part, there's great potential there. So we were very lucky at MROS that Matt Dalton was doing a PhD, which is now finished, on what the micromorphological evidence can tell you. And it's amazing. It's everything from the presence or absence of certain types of animals in domestic spaces to production, whether that's woodworking or dealing with other types of material. But it's incredibly labor intensive and expensive. And of course, we all know in Egypt, it's not possible on the whole. So, and again, we're just seeing a small sample, and it raises as many questions as it does provide us with fantastic answers. And then there's a real challenge, kind of alluding to what Miriam was saying, is how do you retrospectively apply that knowledge to looking at plans of, I don't know, Deir el-Balas or Amarna or Mitrahina or whatever it is, Noctis, that's the challenge. Retroactively fitting our new knowledge to much bigger data sets, because of course, much bigger exposures of ancient sites. I think that's one of the challenges with budgeting, but also access to sites, the destruction of sites, and the amount of documentation we need to do now means doing kind of house level or neighborhood level excavations is very rare. So yeah, finding that compromise between the old data sets and our new approaches is going to be critical.